So reflect that we're alive today. We feel we're alive today. We're still breathing in and out. But things can change in a moment. And tomorrow, people could be doing prayers for us, for oneself. Or as happens in this country, may already have been quickly dispatched to the funeral pyre and burnt or buried if we're Christian or Muslim. And of course, this feels unreal to talk about it. Doesn't seem like it's going to happen to me. We feel almost definite that we'll be attending any meetings or any programs we had scheduled for tomorrow or day after. We feel, we don't have any doubt we'll be there. But that is wrong, proven again and again that that's wrong. So we should be, we can be grateful we're still alive together and able to spend this precious human life a little bit longer, because as the teachings say, we can make this life so meaningful every second. Every second we can engage in mental, physical, and verbal actions that are incredibly beneficial and create a vast, you could say, positive vibration in our consciousness, which can propel us to not only happy human future lives, but to liberation and enlightenment. And this is not the case in any other kind of rebirth, is it? Animals can't do this, however intelligent they may be. Other beings are so preoccupied either with their bliss, as in the higher God realms, or with suffering, very manifest suffering, that they have absolutely no ability to engage in anything meaningful. They cannot transform every moment of their lives into something transformative or liberative, liberation-oriented. Only we humans can do that, so we can be very grateful for that. Some people have texted me saying, they will pray for Rinpoche's, that Rinpoche have a peaceful transition and this and that, which is very well-meaning. But from our point of view, Rinpoche, Lama Zopa Rinpoche doesn't need any help from us. We need help from the Guru. He doesn't need help from us. He's in total control of his situation. Right now, he is still in meditation. The videos come out from Kapan. Clinically, Rinpoche is dead. He's dead to us. But in the physical sense, in the medical sense, Rinpoche is dead. And we'll never see him again walking and talking in this particular body we've been used to. But he's still not totally dead from a Vajrayana perspective, because he is still in meditation. With the subtle mind, his body is not showing any signs of degeneration. He is sitting in meditation on his sofa or whatever, his seat, completely still. But there is no rigor mortis. There is no, there's no usual inflexibility of the body and tightening and so forth of the body, as happens in ordinary death. So Rinpoche is not an ordinary death. And we may say, wow, but then you see that's something the Tibetan Buddhist tradition teaches. That's the higher levels of practice are all about, transforming ordinary death, ordinary rebirth, ordinary intermediate state, transforming them into the path to enlightenment, so that they are no longer ordinary. They become something transformative. So Rinpoche is in total control of his mind. He's in a clear light meditation, so-called, which is the most subtle, most deepest level of meditation, in which he can then guide his own consciousness to the, wherever it's most beneficial. So hopefully he will take another human rebirth for us and come back somewhere. However, that might sound very strange to some of us, very strange indeed. But that's okay. There are many strange things in this world. I find what's up very strange, in the sense, like a miracle. What we are having here, all of us together on a screen, that's like a miracle. If I told my grandfather this would be happening, my grandfather who died 30, 40 years ago, if I told him this is what's going to be happening in 30, 40 years, he'd have thought I'm an idiot, that I'm making it up. It's like magic, isn't it? So anyway, there are many things we cannot understand, but it doesn't mean we have to reject them. We can have an open mind. And this will be something we'll be talking a lot about in this session. It's very connected with that. Okay, let's just spend a few minutes together, silently, motivating. All of you have heard about motivation and how to motivate. So motivate in the way that you find most appropriate right now, so that this session together can be meaningful, beneficial for all of us. Okay. So so today will be a mix of explanation, some of my own personal experience with the followers of Babasaheb and my small amount of study of his works. And today we'll be making most use of his Buddha and his Dhamma, his main contribution, I would say, at least on the spiritual side. Of course, there are a vast number of speeches and other things that he wrote. Many volumes are there of Babasaheb's works. But we'll be focusing mostly on this one. So I became interested in Babasaheb Ambedkar in several ways. One in particular was when I would visit certain shrines, houses of people, of my friends, especially partly in Delhi, but mainly in Maharashtra, when I began to visit there, because our family was very friendly with Baba Amte, the social worker, who had a leprosy project south of Nagpur, a place called Warora. And we would go there, and there was a small vihara in Warora, and there are, of course, hundreds, thousands of these small viharas probably all over Maharashtra and other places. And I would be struck by the fact that often there would be a small picture of Shakyamuni Buddha and a big picture of Babasaheb Ambedkar. I think, oh, that's interesting, because coming from the Tibetan Buddhist tradition, we put so much emphasis on Shakyamuni Buddha, and not just Shakyamuni, but other manifestations, right? Avalokiteshwar, Manjushri, Vajrapani, you name it, Tara, bewildering to people who think that, yeah, there is just Lord Buddha. Anyway, I would be bewildered seeing a small picture of Shakyamuni and a big picture of Babasaheb Ambedkar. And because I hadn't studied this, I hadn't met people. So thanks to a friend of mine, student of Dzongsa Rinpoche, Prashant Verma, he very kindly, he had so many contacts, he was a great networker. So he introduced me to his friends in Nagpur. I'd already met Sangharakshita, who is the founder of the Friends of the Western Buddhist Order, and who had a great deal to do with the followers of Babasaheb Ambedkar after his untimely death in 1956. But I hadn't met any of the Ambedkar's followers in India. I'd met Sangharakshita in England because he was an Englishman. But then I had the good occasion to meet his student, whom he had sent to India many years ago, Lokamitra, who then married a local lady in Maharashtra from one of the lower castes, and very bravely at that time married her. They have children, and he's still working with the Ambedkar movement. So what is happening? What is going on? What is this? So first, as I mentioned before, some of the facts for those of you who may not be very familiar with anything. So, and this is straight from Google. This can be got anywhere. What I'm just going to say now, just to remind us. So he was born on the 14th of April, 1891. Okay, that's why today is a celebration. And he died on the 6th of December, 1956. Just about 2 months or so after he had converted to Buddhism with 5 to 6 or 700,000 other people in Nagpur. So he died very, very quickly after embracing Buddhism. And his followers were left bereft at that time. But to come back to this, the ordinary biography, bold, ordinary one. So he was an Indian jurist, economist, social reformer. He was a political leader. He headed the committee which drafted the Constitution of India from the so-called Constituent Assembly debates. He served as the Law and Justice Minister in the first cabinet of Jawaharlal Nehru. And he inspired the so-called Dalit Buddhist movement after renouncing Hinduism. He was member of parliament for the Rajya Sabha for Bombay state from April 1952 to December 1956. He famously said, you know, I'm born a Hindu, but I'm not going to die a Hindu. So we have to explain a little bit what's going on. I think most of us understand quite a bit of this. But of course, it's without reading a little bit about his life, it's very hard, and without really speaking to people from the Dalit community from which Babasaheb sprung, it's very hard to understand what suffering and what humiliation people had to go through. And of course, this is still happening nowadays. So imagine he, as just a couple of instances, you know, as a young man at school he wasn't allowed to eat food with the other higher caste Indian children. He had to eat separately. I mean, imagine that for a child to have to go through that, maybe not understanding it fully, but for sure understanding he's not allowed to eat at the same time, you know, in the same place as his friends or whatever. Presuming he had some friends, you know, at the school. And then, of course, his community is a community that wasn't allowed to, you know, share the water from wells. There would be a well which was used by Brahmins and other upper castes, and the caste that Babasaheb belonged to, they weren't allowed to take water from that place. They had to go to another place. Even now, in modern day Bihar, I'm talking Bihar now, from which I have more experience, there will be what are called Harijan Tola, means a particular part of a village there would be a cluster of houses apart from the main village, which is where the lower caste people would live, so-called, formerly called untouchable. Gandhi called them the Harijans, or children of God, which they don't like that label. We'll come to that later, a little bit about the Gandhi Ambedkar split. Although I think they actually had a great deal of respect for each other, you know, on one level. So even that this is happening now in modern India, this is happening 7-8 kilometers away from where I sit at Broad Institute. There are those clusters of houses which are not connected with the main village. And I visited these places because we did work with such people, and it's pretty horrific sometimes to see how they live compared to other people. And you know, we would go and visit them, for example, in the hot sun, because Root Institute was trying to start a program to help them develop. And I was struck, although I should have known better, I was struck by the fact that even in the intense heat of the summer, the people in the village would never offer us anything to eat or water, anything. And I thought, what's going on, you know? And of course, they also had their own problems, like a lot of them were drinking and not behaving well at meetings. But I was wondering, why aren't they offering us water even? Then I realized that, you know, so much have they been conditioned that they are polluted, dirty. They didn't want to risk offering us water and be rejected. You know, people did not accept water from their hands. So things like that still happening. So you can imagine what it was like when Babasaheb was a child and in the early years of the 20th century. You can imagine. He would have been 9 or 10 years old, yeah, at the turn of the 20th century. And so here's someone who's highly intelligent. He got a sponsorship, the details you can read about in other places. And he was able to study abroad. He studied at the University of Columbia in the United States. He studied at LSE in London and at the bar, meaning the law. He got a law degree in London. A highly educated person, highly educated, brilliant mind. And imagine doing that, coming back to India and being treated the same way, looked down upon, mistreated, all that prejudice, being, treated as, as the label suggests, as an untouchable. Imagine that. After being abroad, having such an education, and so forth, coming back to that. So, of course, this deeply hurt him, distressed him. And here I like to see, in one sense, there's a similar pattern going on in Gandhi's life, because he was kicked off a train, right, in South Africa, because he was in India, trying to travel first class. He was kicked off the train. And that's when he decided he had to do something about that. So, if one looks, there are many strands that can connect what Gandhi went through and what Ambedkar did, although, of course, very different in many ways. Anyway, so Babasaheb put up with all of this, or you could say in one sense he didn't put up with this. He decided enough is enough. I've had enough of this kind of society, which treats people so badly, in such a prejudiced manner, such a cruel manner. Certainly not going to, continue being a so-called Hindu. I must convert and lead my people to embrace a religion which is more humane and which will give us dignity. So after much thought and research, he decided on Buddhism. And if one looks at his book, The Buddha and His Dhamma, which I have several copies, I was given a copy by my friends in Etawah in Uttar Pradesh. They gave me a copy. I haven't read the Hindi version because I don't read Hindi very well. Of course, it's in Marathi originally, but or translated into Marathi. But this is the English version. So I'd like to go through bits of this and give a few comments, and then we can have some discussion later. Okay. So this is a book that he was still working on, it said, when he died. He still might have made some revisions to it. It's a book that probably most followers of Babasaheb never bother to read, unfortunately, because it's become, like many things in modern society, there's a lot of polarization, there's a lot of conversion to Buddhism and so forth for political reasons, of course also social reasons. And very few people are interested to go deeply into things, aren't they, nowadays? People are in a hurry. People are swayed by leaders and politicians of questionable morals and integrity and intelligence, I think. I well remember Samdong Rinpoche Ji, the ex-prime minister of the Tibetan government in exile, wonderful, great scholar, and His Holiness Dalai Lama's right-hand man. Him giving a speech at the Nagalok Center in Nagpur, which is where Lokamitra, I mentioned, him and his group have a center. A lot of it funded by the Dalai Lama, by the way, for the Ambedkar Buddhists, neo-Buddhists. And he was saying to them, because he had already read the book. He was anyway, Samdang Rinpoche had read the book, and he was telling people, look, you have to read the book. You have to read what Babasaheb wrote. If you don't read what he wrote, then how do you really understand the man and what he's trying to say to you? It's all very well, as was happening today in Bodh Gaya, because I went briefly to the celebration of, what is just people chanting, going down the road chanting, kids having children go around the road chanting. and very shallow kind of speeches, which didn't go deeply into anything at all until I was there. And a lot of monks spoke, one or two lay people maybe. I was burning to say something, but I arrived a bit late, and they didn't have me on their list of speakers. So I didn't say what I wanted to say, and what I wanted to say would have hurt some of them, so maybe better I didn't say anything. Anyway, what I wanted to actually say to them is this, that look, you make statues of Babasaheb holding the Constitution of India. That's good. But please understand that Babasaheb himself was not satisfied with the Constitution of India. He knew what was wrong with it. He knew that it was based on a British model, which wasn't necessarily the best model for India. And he saw where there would be loopholes. And of course, many great things are said in this Constitution of India, but it is not followed by the vast majority of people, because the vast majority of people are still following caste, making caste distinctions and so forth, which is prohibited in the Constitution, I would say. So anyway, I didn't want to say things like that. And I didn't want to say things that Babasaheb himself had said, like he said, and this is so important for us as whatever kind of Buddhists we call ourselves. Babasaheb said in one of his speeches, I can't remember which year, could have been as early as 1935, when he was already making speeches. But anyway, he said that I don't want sheep, cattle and sheep like followers. I want followers who are intelligent, who use their mind, who are capable of critical thinking. I don't want sheep as my followers. He said Buddhism, it would have been later than 1935. He said Buddhism is not an easy religion to follow. He said this. It is not for people, who can't think, who are unwilling to think for themselves, work things out, So in that sense, he was I would say, a true follower of Shakyamuni Buddha, to rely on one's intelligence and checking things. But now, of course, what we see is a very sheep-like adherence throughout the world to ideologies. And unfortunately, Babasaheb's legacy is prone to that they're just unthinking, blind followers who are, not investigating, and therefore not really benefiting from Buddhism. What has happened is, and totally understandably, it's understandable, but it's sad, is that there's a tremendous amount of ill will and anger towards Hindus and Hinduism. And of course, this is totally understandable. Your ancestors have been persecuted, even raped or killed, apart from the normal, you could say, or abnormal discrimination, the kind of apartheid of caste, obviously they're not going to they're not going to appreciate caste Hinduism, are they? And this is why they didn't appreciate Gandhiji, who had, I think, tremendous amount of compassion for everyone, but felt that Hindu caste society could be reformed, that there was hope. But I think Ambedkar knew better, and he knew this was not going to happen. And it hasn't happened yet. So anyway, if we had gone through even a fraction of what his followers had gone through, we would also feel that way about Hinduism. And so a lot of his followers, even up to now, have anger, to the extent that, I'm wearing this on my hand, right, from a particular teaching I took. Anyway, it doesn't matter who from. And if a really strong follower of Babasaheb sees that, he'll say, why are you wearing that? Because that reminds him of Hinduism and rituals and tying of, ribbons around your wrists and so forth. And understandably, they don't like it because it reminds them of something which is very, very, divisive and harmful. Of course, they may not even bother to ask me what it's about. They will immediately think that I'm sort of some kind of sympathizer with the right-wing Hindus or something. So this is sad. This is sad that there is that kind of thing. So there is that anger. And so the anger comes in the way of developing, obviously, love and compassion. Yeah, this is obvious. Sorry, it's just a very important message. Just a second. Aljola, एक Zoom session चल रहा है. मैं आपसे बाद में करता हूँ. Yeah, I'm sorry. That was Situ Rinpoche's attendant. Situ Rinpoche is writing a condolence letter. And anyway, he's coming to teach at Tushita on the 26th. So, you see, with that level of hostility, it's hard to really take to heart a religion which is talking about love, compassion, tolerance, and so forth. However, one thing I read which very much encouraged me is a book called Jai Bhim, and Jai Bhim is the greeting that many Buddhists say to each other after the name of Babasaheb, Bhimrao Ambedkar. So Jai Bhim is their greeting. This book called Jai Bhim, it has the reflections of one of the Dhammacharis, one of the teachers in the new Buddhist tradition of Babasaheb. And he said he also had this hostility and anger towards Hindus. Again, as we're saying, quite natural to have that. But he said, because I did a lot of meditation and took to heart the teachings on loving kindness, and I did the loving kindness, the metta meditation. Metta is Pali, yeah. The Ambedkarite movement mainly uses Pali language. The Sanskrit is associated with caste Hinduism, so they're not very warm towards Sanskrit. Anyway, metta, the metta bhavana, metta meditation, he said I did that sincerely, and now, I feel, loving kindness for everyone, towards everybody, which of course doesn't mean he agrees with things, but he doesn't have that hostility towards people he had before. So I think that's a very good sign, isn't it? That's a wonderful thing. It shows how the Buddha Dharma has the ability to change one's mind. Yeah. So let me give some personal instances and some more insight into why Babasaheb is so important for millions of people in India today. So he embraced Buddhism with 5 or 6 there. I think the estimates vary, 500,000 to 700,000 people in October 1956. He took the refuge vows himself, became a Buddhist, and then immediately he administered those vows to all those people, which of course, from a classical Buddhist point of view, is a no-no. You can't, as a lay person, take vows and then, give them to everyone. Anyway, this was a special occasion. Desperate measures are needed in desperate circumstances. Yeah, there was a monk there, but from whom Babasaheb took the vows, but then he administered them, as far as I can understand. Anyway, because Babasaheb didn't have a very good experience with monks, unfortunately. He didn't meet many monks who inspired him with their zeal or their work or their selflessness. And one particular visit to Sri Lanka, where he was very disappointed with the monastic order, because all he could see was people just, being offered things and sitting on chairs and very comfortably and not doing much work for the people. People would go to them, make offerings and bow and receive teachings. So that was not Babasaheb's idea of, what Buddhism should be. He was understandably an activist. He had to be. He had to be an activist to work for his community. So anyway, he converted. Later, many years later, when I was on a retreat, maybe 10, 12 years ago, with some of my Ambedkarite friends in Maharashtra, at a very wonderful retreat center, not far from Pune, people were sharing their experiences of their parents and grandparents, because many people have been saying, to be a good Buddhist, to be a proper Buddhist, you have to take refuge properly in the Buddha, His Dhamma, and His Sangha. Yeah. and really study, practice, meditate, like we emphasize in the Tibetan Buddhist tradition, right? In what we call the Nalanda tradition. But here were people saying that for their their grandfathers, grandmothers usually, just the process, just that act of taking refuge together with Babasaheb Ambedkar in 1956 was like a rebirth. That was like a rebirth for them. You know, it was like a symbolic casting off of the chains of outmoded, for them, superstitious, biased, violent form of religion, and taking on of something very noble, viewed with morality, compassion, karuna, and metta, right? That for them, it was like a rebirth. They didn't have to. They didn't feel they had to go and start studying Buddhism, you know, much. For them, just that act, it was like an act of also rebellion, but also an act of faith in Buddha and in Babasaheb very much, especially in Babasaheb, who they call Bodhisattva, Babasaheb, Bodhisattva, Babasaheb Ambedkar. They knew that term, Bodhisattva. They understood that concept of kind of a liberator, someone who liberates others. So they felt that just taking refuge itself was a great step, a liberative step, you know. So in that sense, that became, I think, a hindrance later, especially since Babasaheb died so quickly after ordaining, after this conversion, this mass conversion. So quickly, people lost their guiding light, the force behind their rebirth, you could say. And so in that context, people like Sangharakshita, the Englishman, who was a monk at that time, he did a lot of work apparently, giving lecture after lecture after lecture in the shanty towns and the houses of people in Mumbai and other places to try and give them some courage and uplift them, because they had lost their leader so quickly. Anyway, now I want to look a little bit at Babasaheb's book. We can't do it justice in a short session, obviously. It's a book in its English version of about 600 pages. So obviously, Babasaheb went to a great effort in studying, because he was a lawyer and a very fine mind, and he knew how to study and put things together. But we'll find that some of what he says is very different from, the way we have been introduced to Buddhism. But one very excellent thing, you see, the other thing, because Babasaheb experienced in the worst way the violence, you could say, of a tradition that was based still on hearsay and on tradition and on superstition and on lack of humanity, you could say, and also was very much a rural phenomena also. He became someone who was very enamored of a modern way of looking at things, of a rational, scientific, modern, even Western model, even. For Gandhi, for example, the village was something that could be the model of democracy, could be based in the village, village self-government. For Babasaheb, understandably, the village and village communities were a hotbed of superstition, of casteism. And of course, unfortunately, they still are, you see, in many ways. So whereas Gandhiji, and I think rightly, long-term, wanted to focus more on the rural, because we're seeing what modern civilization has turned into with its emphasis on the urban. Anyway, Babasaheb wanted a more sort of urban emphasis, in the sense that for him, the city was where there was more modernism, rationality, scientific temper, not people who were, going by the whims or whatever of Brahmins who were, leading them from one corner to the next, and acting in such a despicable way against the lower castes, Babasaheb didn't want that. So he was a rationalist, he was a humanist, he was a lawyer, he was into critical thinking of a very humanistic but practical, we could say materialist in the sense of, not in the negative sense of materialist, but in believing what you can analyze and what you can see and come to terms with your five senses. So for him, he wouldn't have been comfortable with Buddhist teachings on realms of beings that we cannot see. That would have been difficult for him. Although I think he softened a bit towards the end of his life, but he had to show that scientific temper. So in a prologue to this book, Buddha and His Dhamma, there's an excerpt from the Encyclopedia of Religion and Ethics, which is very interesting, and really people need to read this. It's a bit complicated, but what he's saying is that one has to look at religion in a different way now from how it was looked at before. He says that there's the rapid increase of scientific knowledge and in thought. This is in the encyclopedia. The rapid progress of scientific knowledge and thought, so that requires us to look at religion differently. There's deeper intellectual interest in the subject, intellectual interest, not blind faith interest. There's a widespread tendency in all parts of the world to reform or reconstruct religion, or even to replace it by some body of thought, more rational, scientific, less superstitious. And the fourth thing, there's the effect of social, political, and international events of a sort which in the past have both influenced and been influenced by religion. So all these factors, scientific knowledge, deeper intellectual interest, to the tendency to reform and reconstruct religion and make it more rational, and then the effect of the social, political, and international milieu. So all of these are having an effect on how we study and practice and understand religion. And this is very good. It's very good in a way. It's excellent. But what it does is, and this is very pertinent in terms of Mahayana and Vajrayana, it blocks an ability sometimes to be able to accept what the senses cannot see. So if there's something I cannot see or taste or touch or smell, then I label it unscientific. And it's couldn't be possible. It's superstition. So it's very easy, you see, for some followers, probably of Babasaheb, to term some aspects of Mahayana, Buddhism, and Vajrayana as complete make-believe. But let's look at something else, which, because of you see, when you begin to understand where Babasaheb is coming from, and his need to wean his people away from a superstitious way of looking at life, then one can understand this a bit better, what I'm going to say, what I'm going to introduce to you now. This is right on the first page of the introduction of this amazing book, actually, which, remember, Samdang Rinpoche himself, the great Tibetan Nalanda tradition scholar, was encouraging the Ambedkarites to read. It's also like saying to people, look, if you're going to preach to me about your leader and you haven't even read what your leader has written, then that's a problem. First understand what your leader, what your hero is saying, then come and talk to us. That makes sense. You have to understand where you have to study, like we have to study Buddhism. Otherwise, how can we talk intelligently about Buddhism to anyone? We haven't studied or practiced. Anyway, there's the question coming early on in the Buddha's life of him leaving home, right? Leaving home, deciding to leave home because of seeing a sick person, a dead body, an old person, and so forth. And Babasaheb says, how could it possibly be that something like that turned the Buddha's mind, Siddhartha's mind, and made him want to leave the palace? Because he says, look, this is absurd, he says. The Buddha became a wanderer, a parivraj, at the age of 29. So How is it he hadn't seen these three things earlier, He's 29 and he hasn't seen a dead body, hasn't seen a sick person. Of course, the traditional thing is to say his father hadn't allowed any of these things to be seen by him. But yeah, on one level, that's absurd. But on another level, I think the whole traditional story of the Buddha is totally correct in the sense that it's trying to show us how we are all prisoners of our own conditioning. Buddha was a prisoner of his father who wanted him to stay in the palace and be the king, be the next leader, So, of course, he may have seen these things, but the point is the cumulative effect of understanding, of beginning to understand birth, sickness, aging, death, and seeing the example of a meditator under a tree, and of course his own samskars, because Buddha, he had a past. He didn't suddenly have this one birth. Anyway, it's the culmination of his experience, which made him see life as very unsatisfactory and to want to leave, to find the answers. Because Ambedkar then gives what I consider a very, very strange, something for me very strange. And it just shows how people coming from different perspectives can have totally different reasonings for things. He says that Buddha left the palace and because it was part of a bargain to stop the warfare between his Shakya tribe and the Kolia people. They were fighting over over river waters. And so he left in order to bring peace between his clan and this other clan. Somehow it was connected with that. I find that actually a bit ridiculous, but understandable for someone who's looking at things from a social perspective, not so much from a spiritual perspective at that point. He goes as far to say, I think in one place, that this whole thing about Four Noble Truths is, even the Four Noble Truths, he said, invented by the monks later on. How could Buddha teach that? It's too much leading to despair. It's a teaching of despair, the Four Noble Truths. This is what he says in one place. I find that very strange, isn't it? This first teaching of the Buddha that is accepted by all of the traditions of Buddhism, he didn't want to accept that. He asks in this introduction, he says the second problem is created by the Four Noble Truths. Do they really form part of the original teachings of the Buddha? This formula cuts at the root of Buddhism. If life is sorrow, death is sorrow, rebirth is sorrow, then there's an end of everything. Neither religion nor philosophy can help a man to achieve happiness in the world. If there's no escape from sorrow, then what can religion do? What can Buddha do to relieve man from such sorrow, which is ever there in birth itself? The four Aryan truths or noble truths are a great stumbling block in the way of non-Buddhists accepting the gospel of Buddhism. For the four Aryan truths deny hope to man. These truths make the gospel of Buddha a gospel of pessimism. Do they form part of the original gospel, or are they the later accretion by the monks? So for us, that would be very brought up in the Tibetan tradition, based on the traditional teachings, that Four Noble Truths are the first things Buddha taught, because that's what he understood deeply. And we would argue very much with Ambedkar that, look, you are focusing too much, like the Western scholars did in the beginning, on the first noble truth and the second noble truth. But actually, even the second noble truth contains within it the seeds of hope, because the second noble truth says there is a cause of suffering. So think about it. If there's a cause of suffering, there's hope, right? Because you've got the cause. If you're a doctor, you know the cause of a disease, then that's good, isn't it? Then you know, if I get rid of the cause, I get rid of the disease. So I find Dr. Ambedkar's reasoning here very strange. And I think it's the result of maybe what he was trying to emphasize, and also part of his scientific temper and his upbringing. So, and of course, on the face of it, it is bad news. And I don't know how much I don't suppose he would have come in touch with the teachings on Buddha nature, which is so much a part of the Mahayana and the third turning of the wheel of Dharma. You see, the Four Noble Truths are from the so-called first turning of the wheel of Dharma. And if you just emphasize that without the second and the third, the second one where emptiness is emphasized, and the third one where the Buddha nature is also discussed, then of course there is a danger of seeing Buddhism as something very pessimistic. Like I mentioned yesterday, you hear the sound of a bird, and Lama Zopa Rinpoche says to people who are listening, oh, listen to that bird, sound of suffering. And you say, oh no, I can't listen to the birds now without thinking it's the sound of suffering. But of course, we have to understand more deeply what is being said. It's being said that even if you can fly in the sky and chirrup like a bird, there is still suffering in that. You are not free, you're not liberated. And often birds are not just twittering because they're happy or joyful. They're twittering because they're alarmed or whatever it is. So anyway, and then of course, Babasaheb had a problem with the doctrine of the soul, he says, which is not a good word, soul, karma, and rebirth. Buddha denied the existence of the soul, but he's also said to have affirmed the doctrine of karma and rebirth. At once a question arises, if there's no soul, how can there be karma? If there's no soul, how can there be rebirth? These are baffling questions. In what sense did the Buddha use the words karma and rebirth? These are very good questions he's asking. Did he use them in a different sense than the sense in which they were being used by the Brahmins of the day? If so, in what sense? Did he use them in the same sense in which the Brahmins did? If so, is there not a terrible contradiction between the denial of the soul and the affirmation of karma and rebirth? So this contradiction needs to be resolved. And the fourth problem, he said, relates to the monk, the bhikkhu, the fully ordained monk. He says, what was the object of Buddha in creating the monk, the bhikkhu? Was the object to create a perfect man? Or was his object to create a social servant, devoting his life to service to people and being their friend, guide, and philosopher? This is a very real question. On it depends the future of Buddhism. If the bhikkhu or monk is only a perfect man, then he is of no use to the propagation of Buddhism. Because although he may be a perfect man, he is also a selfish man. If, on the other hand, he is a social servant, he may prove to be the hope of Buddhism. You see this emphasis on the social liberator. Not much emphasis in Ambedkar's thought on nirvana. For him, nirvana, of course, as in Mahayana, nirvana is not the highest aim, but for him, nirvana or liberation is nothing if it's not social liberation, emancipation from a corrupt system, which is creating pain for people. So he didn't see things so much in the larger perspective of overall dukkha or suffering, but more in a socially constructed sense. So that if the social suffering were gotten rid of, that would be somehow enough. So there are these, from our point of view, lacunas or shortcomings in Babasaheb's teachings initially. But I think if we had time and looked at this book, we would see how he goes more deeply into karma, more deeply into rebirth. And we might have to have another session on this. Because he says the Hindu law of karma is based on the soul, on some kind of permanent soul, whereas the Buddhist one is not. So he's understood that. The Buddhism has a totally different understanding of what is soul, what is self. And of course, Buddhism doesn't use the word soul or atma. In fact, there is no soul in Buddhism. So he would be correct in saying that. There's no soul. Yeah, anyway, and then he emphasizes tremendously in the second half of this book, morality and karuna. Morality and compassion. Tremendous emphasis on that in the book. Which is appropriate, I think, and very essential. Because when you've been through so much suffering yourself and see your people your community going through so much suffering, Of course, it can arouse anger, but also it arouses compassion. And I think he was probably somebody who had developed that compassion, not just towards his own folk, but probably much more universally, you know. Anyway, so he wants the monk to be a social servant, not just some perfect person who is, you know, overcome ignorance, anger, attachment, or whatever. So he's saying this question must be decided in the interest of the future of Buddhism. And in a way, I agree. The Buddha himself said that Buddhism only technically survives if there's a community of monks and nuns available to teach and to help people, to guide people. And he does say that he found the Mahabodhi Society journal of the time, which would have been one of the few Buddhist journals available to him in the 50s. He finds it boring. There's no response from the readers. He says, I want the book that I'm writing to evoke a lot of response from the readers. He says, I hope this book will excite the readers to come and make their contribution to the solution of these 4 problems that he's raised. By why Buddha left his home? What are the 4 noble truths? Are they really the Buddha's teachings? Or then the 3rd one relating to karma and rebirth, and the 4th relating to the monks. What is a monk? He hopes this will stimulate dialogue and discussion, which is, of course, good. Buddha himself wanted things to be discussed, not just accepted because he says it. So that is something very positive, something I think very good, taken together with Ambedkar's wish, hope that stated, statement that he doesn't want cattle as followers. He wants people to be able to think, thinking people, you know. There are many reasonings are given in the book. You could get, well, excuse me, what gets the feeling that this is someone who has studied logic, you know, although maybe more sort of lawyer type logic. But this book is the work of a very intelligent, highly intelligent person who had a mission in life, a very big mission, you know, to liberate hundreds of thousands of people from the shackles of a very, very divisive social situation, which is still there, you know. How are we doing? What time? 2 minutes past 8. Yeah. I'm just trying to think of any other anecdotes I can give. Well, one is that there was a student who had gone through the course that was given at Nagaloka, this Buddhist center of studies of Ambedkar's works and who engage Buddhism in Nagpur. This student from Orissa, he had done the 3-year course in there at Nagalok. And he was with us at Vandana Shiva's organic farm in Dehradun, where Samdom Rinpoche ji was giving some teachings. He had agreed to give some teachings. He's a great, I would say, Gandhian as well as scholar and politician, but of the best kind. He was the first elected prime minister of the Tibetan government in exile after His Holiness gave up all his temporal powers 8-10 years ago, whatever. So Samdom Rinpoche ji, he only took up that position, he said, because people wanted him to. Otherwise, he just wanted to spend his life teaching and in retreat. He didn't want political power or anything. Anyway, Samdom Rinpoche is giving teachings, and this boy from Orissa, who had done the 3-year course at Nagalok, listening to Samdom Rinpoche teach, he was amazed. He said, wow, this is absolutely mind-blowing. These teachings I'm getting here on the nature of the mind and so forth, this is amazing. I didn't receive any teachings like this before. And the point is, you see, the Nalanda tradition, so-called, like the Dalai Lama likes to call it, and the tradition as preserved in Tibet, it is just so thorough, it is just so much study, so much discussion, meditation, reflecting. It is a very, 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 you could say it's really so thorough. It, if properly followed, it has really the ability to transform the mind. And these kind of teachings are not available anywhere else. Sorry. There's just that kind of thoroughness, and that kind of input from realized people is not there in any other branch of Buddhism at the moment. But the Tibetans have kept this Indian tradition, Mahayana tradition, alive, which was there at Nalanda. They kept it alive, and they also infused it with new life, the Tibetans, because all of their great beings, most of them commented, wrote commentaries on the Indian commentators and on the original sutras, you know. So the Indian Pandits, Mahapandits, the great acharyas, scholars of India, Nagarjuna, Aryadeva, Chandrakirti, Dharmakirti, Dignag, you know, Shantideva, Gunaprabha, Shakyaprabha, Vimukti Sena, all these people, all their texts were great inspiration for the Tibetans. And you see, as Dalai Lama said, for these Nalanda scholars, they were not afraid to challenge what the Buddha said, or what was purported to be what the Buddha said. If they felt it was wrong and didn't abide by the reason, so they were willing to go against some of the things even that they find in the sutras. So there is that spirit of inquiry, and certainly an ability not to engage in blind faith, very strong in the Tibetan tradition. So this is something, this is why I really wish Babasaheb had lived another 5-10 years. Really, I wish, and had met more and more Tibetan Buddhists. He met His Holiness. Apparently, they were together at one meeting, which they would have been, because the Dalai Lama came to India in 1956. It was the 2500th anniversary of Lord Buddha's enlightenment. He was in India. He said he did have some meetings with the Ambedkarites, but he was very disappointed, Dalai Lama said, for a reason that has plagued them, I think, since then, and that is that they were never able to agree amongst themselves. A lot of divisiveness and infighting among the followers of Babasaheb. This disturbed His Holiness, and then said he stopped going to the meetings that they invited him to. Something like that. So you see, it seems that unless one is very skillful, it's not enough to give up something and to fight against injustice. That's of course right, but the Ambedkar movement, I've heard from many people, especially the political side of it, plagued with infighting and so forth, you know. This is very sad, which is why things like that, what I quoted from the book Jai Bhim, is very encouraging for me. There are people who are actually bothering to, you know, reflect and meditate on loving kindness. That is changing their minds. That is making them human beings who accept people who disagree with them as human beings and don't harbor hatred against them, but can develop loving kindness towards everybody. That is something very encouraging. And more, I guess, followers of Babasaheb are going to courses, receiving teachings. Slowly, more and more of them are beginning to understand, I think, deeply what the Buddha taught. But you see, if they were to read Buddha and His Dhamma carefully, they would be highly inspired. There's many wonderful things, many stories. Babasaheb, obviously, one can tell he enjoyed very much. He was inspired by reading about Buddha's life, very much, because most of these stories are there. I haven't read the book cover to cover, but you know, going through certain bits, I can see. But of course, he's put it in his own language, and a lot of it given his own slant, which may not be the same as a Tibetan scholar's slant, you know. But there's wonderful material on craving, on lust, on anger, on hurt, ill will, on wisdom, justice, good company. Wonderful basic teachings. Sorrow, happiness, on hypocrisy. He quotes the Dhammapada a lot, which is a wonderful early text, you know. So obviously, no wonder Samdom Rinpoche told people, read the text, read what Babasaheb wrote. Don't just believe or chant slogans or harbor anger against Hindus. What use is that? Really, what use is that? A lot on rules, Vinaya, for the wealthy, Vinaya for the householder, Vinaya for the girls, Vinaya for pupil, Vinaya for master and servant, for children, for husband and wife, a special one for girls. Okay, let me read something on that, since there's no section on Vinaya for boys. Excuse me, sitting back like this and sitting in a comfortable way. Being lazy. Okay. So once the Exalted One was dwelling near Bhadia in particular wood. And anyway, these people came, saluted, sat down. Lord, one of the men said, these girls of mine will be going to their husbands' families. Okay, they were being married off, they were going to their husbands' families. Lord, let the Exalted One counsel them. Let the Exalted One advise them for their good and happiness for many a day. Okay, so what did Buddha reply, according to Ambedkar? Then the Exalted One spoke to them and said, wherefore, girls, train yourselves in this way. To whatsoever husband our parents shall give us, wishing our welfare, seeking our happiness, compassionate. Because of compassion for him, we will rise up early, be the last to retire, be willing workers, order all things sweetly, and be gentle boys. Train yourselves thus, girls. And in this way also, girls, we will honor, revere, esteem, and respect all who are our husband's relatives, whether mother, father, recluse, or godly man. And on their arrival, we'll offer them a seat and water. Train yourselves in this way, girls. And in this way also, girls, you should think we will be deft and nimble at our husband's home crafts, whether they be of wool or cotton, making it our business to understand the work so as to do it and get it done. Train yourselves in this way, girls. And in this way also, girls, the money, corn, silver, gold that our husband brings home, we will keep safe. Watch, ward over it, act as no robber, thief, carouser, or wastrel therein. Train yourselves thus, girls. On hearing this advice, the daughters of Ugaha felt exceedingly happy and were grateful to the Lord. So, of course, this would not go down with a lot of modern women, and it shouldn't, but that's okay. Babasaheb was a product of his time. So was Lord Buddha. I don't think Buddha spoke exactly like that, but I think very, very similar. I don't think he's misquoted it a lot. But yeah, traditionally, for harmony in the home, at a time when the man was obviously in charge in a patriarchal society, it was in the interest of the woman to behave in that way, one might argue. However, in other ways, the Buddha was a revolutionary. He introduced ordination for women after initial doubts because of how it would be accepted in a male society, male-dominated society. But then he accepted. That was a revolutionary thing. He accepted all castes into the Sangha. That was a revolutionary thing. So that someone from the lowest caste could meditate and reflect on Lord Buddha's teachings, just as anybody who had come out of the highest of castes, which was not the case with the Hindus at the time. There are horrific stories and maybe some truth in, lower caste people, according to certain Hindu texts, even if they hear a holy text being recited, then boiling oil should be poured in their ears. There are all kinds of very horrible things that one reads about in some of the Hindu texts, which are very hard to digest. Anyway, this is a very interesting book. Those of you who have time should look at it, especially if you are a follower of Babasaheb, or if you're interested to know about this very brave man who, let's face it, against all odds, had the good fortune or whatever to meet up with someone, a Maharaja or whatever, who sponsored him so he could go to the West, study, open his eyes to another world and to reason, rationality, scientific temper. Although I don't know much about how he was treated in the West. I mean, presumably he was treated a lot better than he was treated in India, obviously. But given the incipient racism in the West, as is everywhere, I mean, look at the way Indian people look on Black people. I mean, we're not free of it, right? Or people who are browner than us. So, yeah, imagine. He went through all that and he came back and he put so much effort into taking responsibility for hundreds and thousands of people, millions of people, which is echoed down to this day. So, you know, when one goes through his life and what he did, it's understandable that his picture, until recently, probably still is much bigger than Buddha's picture in their Buddhist viharas, because he is the one who has helped liberate them, you know. But liberation, of course, is in many degrees, and hopefully more and more people can go deeper and deeper into what the Buddha taught, especially the meditations on wisdom. And, of course, the view, without the wisdom, there's no liberation. And then without the compassion and love, there's no enlightenment, full enlightenment of a Buddha. So one really hopes that more and more people take to heart these teachings and the teachings on Buddha nature, which up to now I don't think have really been introduced much to Ambedkar's followers, because many of them would not accept it possibly. They would regard it as some kind of you know, Mahayana dogmatism or something, maybe some of them. So there's a lot of work to be done. This is what I understood by meeting I have many good friends now among the Ambedkar followers, many good friends, many years now. So I think I understand them to some extent. I can understand their pain. They always talk about it. And it's not something I can understand because I haven't, you know, had to go through that kind of discrimination. So anyway, let's have some discussion now. We have a question from, have I put a question? I don't know why I put a question. No, I have no question. I'll lower my hand. Somebody else has a question, no doubt. So I will open it up to discussion. And I'm sorry I went on so long. But it's something that was close also to Lama Zopa Rinpoche's heart, because he told me he knew about so many Buddhists, and he was Indian Buddhist, and he was eager that they get a good education so they really understood what the Buddha taught, so they could help them deeply, you see, in their lives, to transform their lives, to create the causes for lasting happiness and enlightenment. This is what he really wanted, and he urged me many years ago when we started Root Institute and were focusing on our social work projects here in Bodh Gaya. From that time, Rinpoche was reminding me of our responsibility to Indian Buddhists, because he was aware of what was happening. But he was, you know, had a responsibility for so many centers, especially in the West. He couldn't give that level of attention to what was happening in India outside of his own centers. If he'd had more time, I'm sure he would have. And as I said, he gave teachings in Nasik. That was an amazing experience, translating for Rinpoche there. And yet there, I must mention that I felt, oh wow, Rinpoche is going to teach in a traditional way and the people are not going to accept it. This is what I thought as we sat in that little vihara next to Nasik railway station. But Rinpoche's presence and his dynamism, and maybe my translation wasn't too bad, they listened patiently to a traditional, in the sense, classical Buddhist teachings. They accepted. In the sense, they were eager to hear the Dharma. They were eager. It's like they were thirsty to hear the Dharma. Thirsty to hear the Dharma. Given by someone who is obviously sincere. They may not have agreed with everything, you know, but they, you know, obviously Rinpoche's nobility, his sincerity, the energy with which he gave those teachings, it was hard for me to keep up, so much energy in Rinpoche's delivery and everything. So they were very moved, and they sat very patiently through his teaching, which are never less than an hour or two. So they were very patient as they listened to Rinpoche back in, I think, 2008. I remember exactly. I have it in a notebook somewhere. Yeah, excuse me. Jaggery and water. So would people like to discuss something? I just urge you to, of course, study more about Ambedkar and read his book, Buddha and His Dhamma. Many editions of it. This is the one put together for free distribution by these wonderful people in Taiwan who have these books for free distribution. But there are many other editions, including the official government edition and whatever. You'll find it in many places. Sorry if I've bored you. I hope I haven't bored you. This is very important. This is affecting the lives of millions of people in India. Babasaheb Ambedkar, millions of people would claim to be his followers one way or another. Although, I must also say one thing, Lokamitra, the Englishman I mentioned, who married a low-caste woman, I don't know, what word should I be using? Low-caste doesn't sound right. Neither does Harijan, neither does untouchable. Neil, what is the politically correct word to use nowadays?
Dalit.
Dalit is okay? Okay, that's good. So Dalit, which means broken. Actually, the word means broken, someone who is broken. Which is a very powerful word, yeah. But anyway, Dalit, yeah. So he said, and this was kind of ironic, and he said, now even people who have said they've become Buddhists, right? They converted to Buddhism and all. Still, when they marry people, they will marry people according to former caste. So it's like you're becoming a Buddhist to reject caste, but you're still, it's so imprinted in the consciousness, you can't get rid of it completely. And so then they'll be thinking, oh, is this particular caste I was a member of, the subcaste, was it higher than this person or lower? There's all that still going on. He said that many people will not marry people below their caste, even though they're supposed to be casteless now, as Buddhists. So old habits die hard, and one shouldn't be angry about these things, but look at them with, a sense of humor even. And many people, of course, I was complained, oh, we've become Buddhists, but my wife still keeps her old Hindu images in the kitchen or somewhere. I say, take it, what's the big deal? It's okay for now. It's not the main thing. What image you have in your kitchen, what image you have. And I'm always telling my Ambedkar friends, look, your altar is a mess. People don't keep their altars clean. So how can you expect to have respect for Buddhist teachings if you don't keep your altar clean? They don't have offerings on the altar. It's a mess. They have the incense burning there and then they don't clean it up. So Neil, you should tell your Dalit friends, if you're going to have a statue of Buddha or picture, or keep it clean. It should be beautiful to look at. Incense should be lit somewhere where on the floor or nearby, you get the scent, but you don't have to see everything, the aftermath of the incense stick. It looks so horrible. Anyway, this is my prejudice. When you look at Tibetan altars, they're so beautiful. They inspire faith. They inspire faith in the Buddha and his teachings. Even though, of course, Buddha did say in the Diamond Cutter, in the Vajrakata Sutra, those who think of me as a form or a sound, they are wrong. That's not who Buddha is, of course. But if you're going to have a statue which can be very inspiring and so forth, and a reminder, it should be kept beautifully. That applies to all of us. We should have beautiful altars, kept clean regularly, fresh offerings, whether it's just water every day, but keep it fresh, if we can. And I know I'm not very good at this. Tushita Center in Delhi, I've been very, very lazy. one should keep fresh water offerings every day, at least. So like that, we can have good altars. Yeah. Samir Dingraji, boliye.
Hi, Venerable Kabir. Thank you so much for that wonderful summary and inspiring us to discuss this very important book, actually. And I read this book during my undergrad, and I was very happy to do an in-depth study of this, and especially the points in the introduction I found very inspiring to really question some of these things, especially the idea behind this discussion with soul and rebirth and karma. And I find this, especially with Hindus who convert to Buddhism, that, they're like, oh, okay, Buddhism, right? So, and you go to a teaching and you're like, okay, soul, you could just go from Atman to Anatman, right? Oh, it's negated, right? But then again, Babasaheb also talks about this, right? And then you have the idea that rebirth and karma, those are not negated, right? Buddha doesn't say there is no rebirth, and he doesn't say there is no karma, right? He doesn't say a karma, right? In not at least in a negative, negation sense. Maybe a karma is a bad deed, right? So that I find particularly, that question for me was particularly inspiring, because as a Hindu convert to Buddhism, right? Do you go into the teaching thinking, oh, I already know this, right? I already know karma, right? Oh yeah, of course, this is our, ancient tradition, right? So I know karma, right? I know rebirth. But the idea that it's not the same thing, right? It's not, Babasaheb really questions, right? Do you have a good condition today because you did something great in your last rebirth? Is that why you have, precious human body, right? He really questions that. He's like, because again, like you said, he's coming from a social condition, right? Where his community of people are suffering, right? So if you apply this idea that, oh, I have a, great rebirth because I did great things, and you can say to Dalits, oh, you have terrible conditions today, but that's because, oh, you did, right, terrible things in your past life. And it's so easy to kind of, that's where he's questioning that idea, like rebirth and karma, right? So I found that very inspiring. And I I've met, Buddhists who walk confidently and even arrogantly and say that, oh yeah, because, as if it's given that they have the ability to practice Buddhism, or they have the precious, circumstances to practice Buddhism, because they guaranteed they did wonderful things in their previous rebirths, right? And they're like, oh, but there's no acknowledgement of privilege or, connections or social circumstances, or the fact that, I don't know, you have an inheritance and that allows you to study as much as you want, right? And there's no questioning of that things. It's just, oh yeah, I did great things, that's why I have the precious human body. I think precious human body, if you even think about it, that's not a blessing that Buddhism is giving you, right? That's a teaching that's given to inspire you to not waste this precious human life, right? That's not a thing that you cling on to with arrogance, right? So to that extent, I found it very inspiring for him to question these things, and for us, maybe converts, modern day converts to Buddhism, to question this idea. Am I, the way that I'm thinking about karma and rebirth, is that the way the Buddha was talking about it, right? Is it, or is he totally talking about something different? Because I do remember this sutra, reading this sutra, where there was the son of a fisherman, and he says, oh, so the way that I understand your teaching, the Buddha, he's addressing the Buddha in this, and he says the way, or he's maybe addressing the monks, right, who take him to the Buddha immediately and say, okay, he's totally misunderstood it. He says, the way that I understood your teaching is that the consciousness on death travels to another body, right? And the Buddha says, okay, this is totally wrong. The way that you've understood this is totally incorrect, right? And he tells him, please discard this thought right away, right? So I remember reading that. And I remember that if you go into this with like, okay, but I don't have a soul, right? But I have whatever this is travels to another body, which again is in traditional ways is how we understand rebirth. In Buddhism is also, right? But I think, yeah, just questioning that and really looking at it, I'm not saying it from a scientific perspective that we should start analyzing what happens to the body on death or anything like that. I'm not talking about it from that sense, but I'm talking about it from a sense that if we have the precious human body, right, that is a teaching for encouraging us, right? That is an antidote to depression to an extent, right? That's a very important teaching. It's not for us to have arrogance over the precious human body and to say that, yes, I am in this position. I am, this great person. That's why I am a Buddhist, right? So for me, I found the introduction and especially the book, the vows and everything. I found it really inspiring, and also noticed that there is like you said, there's a lack of engagement with the text, because when I was researching articles for it, I couldn't find. But there's also, again, the challenges of, in India, the challenges of publishing something like an engagement on this. Traditional publishers would say, okay, we don't want this book. Who's going to buy it or who's going to read it? And we don't want to publish this article. And so I understand that perhaps this lack of engagement is not from, that the followers don't want to engage, but that they lack, the privilege to publish books or the privilege to publish articles. So I think to some extent, yeah, that's a lot. That's a lot of thoughts, but yeah.
Very good. No, we need more time to discuss these things, because unless we understand karma and rebirth, we're going to have a rather somewhat limited understanding of the path and our potential. So it's very important to get our heads around what is actually reborn, what is karma. Of course, karma is designated as a deeply hidden phenomenon. It's not something easily understood, but it's easily misused, that's for sure. Because the Brahmin could say, oh, to the Dalit, you're suffering in this life because you've done bad things in a past life. But if you're good and obedient and do what I tell you in this life, you will get better karma and you'll have a better rebirth. So imagine what that does to people. And we would have similar difficulties teaching Buddhism at our center in Dharamsala to Israelis, because Israelis whose parents and grandparents have died in the Holocaust teach karma in an insensitive way, they go gaga, they go crazy. You mean we suffered at the hands of the Nazis and got gassed because of bad things we've done? One has to introduce these things very carefully. Of course, we have to look at alternatives. Okay, if there's no cause, maybe things happen without a cause. Maybe God wanted it that way, or maybe blah, blah. But what's the alternative to karma? There is no alternative to karma, unless you say everything is just chaos, random. And that doesn't seem to work in the universe. Nothing is totally random, is it? Anyway, I'm just saying there's different ways. But what you say about it being very inspiring for you is good, because I think that's exactly what Babasaheb wanted, to wake people up, yeah, and to talk about, bring these topics to the fore, because they hadn't been properly investigated by the public for centuries. It had been the domain of the Brahmins, of the upper caste. I'm very much reminded of my studies of English history, because when the Bible was first translated into English that people could understand in the early 16th century, it was revolutionary. The people didn't have to rely on the priests, on the higher clergy to tell them what God wanted or what God said or what Jesus said. They could read it themselves. It was revolutionary, the first English language Bibles. And the language of those early Bibles, at least the revised version of King James Version, is still something incredibly moving to read, the language. something that even my grandfather told me to read, although my grandfather was very anti-religious and would spend literally a long time playing table tennis with me while he was ranting against religion and what had been done in the name of religion over the centuries, mainly Christian religion, not Hindu or Buddhist religion. But he said, Kabir, you must read the Bible because it's so beautiful, the language. So anyway, the point being that Babasaheb, you could say in this book, at least is bringing Buddhism into the realm of the wider public, and then they can debate it. They can debate it with Tibetan scholars, with other people. You know, at least you're using your mind. You know, but it has to be done in a spirit of course, you know, good spirit, dialogue, and trying to learn from each other. But yeah, I think that's where the Nalanda tradition is so amazing, because they take everything to pieces, it seems. They discuss everything. They debate everything. They study. They don't say, oh, yeah, this must be true because Vasubandhu says so. I mean, Dalai Lama himself has said that some things Vasubandhu written are nonsense about, you know, how the universe is. He said it's nonsense. And I remember that deeply offending one of our Buddhist monks, Western Buddhist monks, when he heard His Holiness say that. How can His Holiness say this about, you know, Vasubandhu? It's like, yeah, if it's proven to be nonsense, it's nonsense. In the sense it is not, it's not consonant with reality. Of course, you can then ask, what is reality? And that's also a very good question. But you know what I mean? It's like, okay, the earth really doesn't appear to be flat. Most Tibetans would have believed the earth was flat until, I don't know how long. People say some geshes still might believe the earth is flat, you know. But it seems, with regards to space, which would suggest otherwise, you know. Anyway, it's open to inquiry and debate is something very essential, and Babasaheb, you could say, has done.
Kabir ji?
Yes. Pradeep ji.
Kabir ji, it's what is very remarkable is that Babasaheb embraces Buddhism, questions some of its tenets, but it's not just that he embraces Buddhism because it's a protest for him, it's a rebellion because of the past Buddhist history in India, how Brahmanism kind of uprooted Buddhism from India. That's where the Tibetan Buddhism has played a huge role, because they preserved, people had to flee from here. But I think Babasaheb also reaffirms, because he also, what I have read a little bit, he also says that it's only spiritualism which can save mankind. And that is what he found in Buddhism. He was toying with Marxism. In fact, he was trying to find out whether Christianity is a good religion. Can human beings embrace it? He rejected it. He went to Marxism. And then he had his huge debate within himself whether Marxism is good or Buddhism is good.
Right.
He came to the conclusion that Buddhism also is Marxism, but it has a more human, it has a more human aspect to it. That's why where he thought that Buddhism was a much better option for mankind if it wants to survive.
Yes. Very good, yeah. I was just looking at some of the meeting chat. Neeraj just said the Home Minister, the Secretary of the UK, Miss Suella, I think it's, Suella Braverman, is a lady of Indian origin and a great follower of Master Sangharakshita at the London Buddhist Center, as well as a follower of Dr. Ambedkar. She took the oath on the Dhammapada in the British Parliament, and she is also funding the London Buddhist Center. This is very interesting for me, because I, at the moment, don't have a high opinion of this lady, maybe due to the liberal slant of the Gandhian website that I read, but it doesn't seem she's very tolerant and doesn't show much humanity to immigrants. It seems her policy has been criticized by some people in her own party as being very anti-immigrant. which is ironic since she's an immigrant into England. So many people were allowed into England to work and so forth.
Someone wrote an article, Kabirji, saying that what she is doing, what she is doing proves that even if you are a minority in a country, even if you are black, it doesn't mean that you are not racist. You can also be racist.
Yeah,
she was.
Yeah, I'm very. Yeah, I mean, if she's a follower, she's a follower.
I'm also intrigued. I read that question.
Sorry, what was that?
I read that thing. I wasn't aware that she had taken notes. So I'm also intrigued that her actions don't speak of the oath she has taken on.
This is very common, isn't it? We can profess to be Christians and go to church on Sunday, but next week we could be, I don't know, in a bomber plane or something, or firing missiles from afar. I mean, this is everywhere. We say one thing and we do another. I mean, this is hardly, we all have done that at some point probably. Anyway, I hope Suella, braver man, looks very deeply at Buddha and his Dhamma. Maybe she hasn't read that text very well. And she could think a bit more maybe about morality and compassion. And she might have, apparently she has leadership ambitions. So what she is doing might be based on her political ambition rather than Babasaheb's teachings or Buddha's teachings. And that's the danger of being in politics, I guess. You get a political mindset. So this is being called a webinar, is it? I suppose it is, yeah. Thank you. Thank you, Dhammarakshit Gautam. Yeah. So, yeah. Dhammarakshit Gautamji, are you a monk? Or a lay follower of Babasaheb? Dhammarakshit ji? आप हिंदी में भी बोल सकते हैं अगर चाहें. Okay. So anyone else? Neil, you haven't said anything. Maybe you are horrified by what has been said. I hope not. You're the one who asked for this. Are you nothing to say?
नहीं, मुझे कुछ कहना है. बेसिकली मुझे याद आ रहा है मेरे पिताजी कहते थे कि उन्होंने बाबा साहेब से मुलाकात की थी 1950s में जब वो पूसा इंस्टीट्यूट में पढ़ने गए थे.
अच्छा.
तो उनके साथ में उनके जो सेकंड पीएचडी है दलित कम्युनिटी या वीकर कास्ट कम्युनिटी के मराठी साइड के, वो भी आया करते थे. तो वो कहते थे कि बाबा साहेब was such a presence that just by meeting him you would end up crying. आपके रोना इतना उनका ऐसा था.
I'm sure.
रोना.
Some people, especially from families who have been liberated by his movement. Yeah. Of course, for the Hindus, he was a hated figure, but for people who have another connection, it would have been very moving for them. It's like some people start crying when they meet Dalai Lama ji or whatever. But I'm sure he was a great
there
presence.
are lots of people who met him and who said that just by meeting him there was an inspirational chord that came out of it, even if you were a 6-year-old or a 20-year-old or whatever the age was. So
I can believe that,
had that moving presence to him, and so that's why he's probably labeled as a bodhisattva. And talking to monks of the community, there are about 300,000 monks and nuns in the Mahar caste or the Dalit caste that Babasaheb had.
Really?
Mahar is the word for the untouchable. But that's one of the monks was arguing that Babasaheb had to go through a lot more difficulty than even the Buddha had to, because Buddha had a silver spoon in his mouth when he was born.
That's true.
And Babasaheb came from an impoverished background. He was the 13th or 12th or 14th child or something like that.
Yeah.
I don't remember exactly.
Yeah. Yeah. Uh-huh.
There were a few things that I understood from talking to the monks within our community.
Mm. Mm.
Yeah, that's all. That's all.
Thank you. Where are you based, Neil ji? Where are you based?
मैं नागपुर में हूँ.
नागपुर में हैं. Very good. एक मिलेंगे आपसे एक दिन. बहुत दिन से नागपुर नहीं गया.
आपसे मिला हूँ मैं जब केशव दामदुल प्रवचन दे रहे थे तो आप आए थे और मैं आपके पास बैठा था.
अच्छा याद नहीं है. माफ कीजिएगा. हाँ ठीक है.
तिब्बत हाउस में मिले थे शायद हम लोग. तिब्बत हाउस में.
अच्छा तिब्बत हाउस में. अच्छा. Thank you very much, Neil. Acha, Dhamma Rakshit ji, you have shown your face. You have a great name, Dharma Rakshit Gautam. Protector of the Dharma, Gautam. Very good.
Thank you, sir. Yes, sir.
I
have met you in Delhi. I have met you in Delhi.
Where do you live?
Right now, I am in Assam.
Assam. And where were you born?
I was born in Meerut, UP.
Achha,
So I belong to UP. But I did my higher studies in Delhi. I was in Delhi for quite some time. And I could see your this thing, your center, and I reached your center. I could meet you once.
Okay.
In Hotchkiss. Yes, sir.
Good. Yeah, come again if you can one day. Yeah.
Sir, you please come and visit this place. I'm in Tezpur University.
Tezpur is a long way away. Yeah. Tezpur.
Not too long for you, sir.
Really?
And especially when the world is shrinking. The world is shrinking now. So you please come. Please plan a visit to this place.
Let's see. Yeah, I've been to Lower Assam and to Guwahati, but I haven't been to Tezpur. Yeah.
It is 200 kilometers from Guwahati. Upper side.
Okay. I'll check it on the map.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you.
Yes,
so
sir.
much.
Yes, sir.
Thanks for joining.
Thank you so much, sir.
So anybody?
It was my pleasure.
Good. 8:47. Okay. But we'll try and keep it till 9 maybe and then stop. So what else is in the chat? So much more can be said, but you know, these things take time. Some of his speeches are very inspiring, and of course he wrote on many topics. And,
I think, sir, one thing which makes Ambedkar different from any other social or religious reformers previously and thereafter is his proposition of annihilation of caste. So everyone other than Ambedkar is thinking that let us accept caste is a part of our system. Let us try to live with that. So he is the only one who said that unless we annihilate caste, we cannot see anything good happening, which is, I think, quite practical as we understand Ambedkar and a true pragmatic.
very hard to achieve, right? Annihilation.
Yes. But still,
as I was mentioning, even people who become Buddhists, they're still thinking in terms of, oh, what caste is that person? I will marry them, or I won't marry them. You know? According to Lokamitra, who is observing this.
That is but no one has. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. But no one has even proposed that let us annihilate. All of us, all people have said that okay, the castes are there, but we consider all of the people as equal. But it's not about equality. Unless we are having caste, we cannot think about equality.
Yes, you're right. I think you're right. Definitely. Definitely.
Yes.
That's how it works. And it plays out in all kinds of ugly ways. But it also comes down to lack of opportunity, lack of equal opportunity to proper education. Because I know many people I know who are bitterly resentful of the fact that there's reservation for Dalit students in educational institutions whose quality of work is less than many of the upper caste students, but for the good reason that they haven't had a proper education, that they're too poor. But it creates so much resentment that they're not getting, that they get into the institutions on much lower marks, such a cause of resentment. So
We
part
need
of
to
the
understand.
answer
Yes,
lies
sir.
in good basic
Yes.
education for all,
Mm,
of
mm.
course, not
Yes.
based on caste. But if there's caste,
Yes.
then even at the lower level, you can't get perhaps such a good education. At our school, even in Bodh Gaya, and we, of course, don't have that understanding of caste, at least the people running the school, but maybe some of the teachers do. But it's very clear how many of the underprivileged Dalit students, they are not as well dressed, they're not as healthy, they have to help more at home with the family. So they're already at a kind of disadvantage because they're poor. And then they will also miss classes a lot. They'll have more sickness because they're not having as good food, If they're from
and we have to understand, the gain or loss of generational learning and what we call as cultural capital, apart from social capital, which we used to see is functional in our society and in our day-to-day life also.
Yes.
Yes.
There's many things. If we have another session on this, I'll try and get my good friend in Hyderabad to also join us, Maitriveer. He was a student at JNU, and he studied very hard, became a professor, or at least assistant professor, and he's teaching in Hyderabad.
Okay, sir.
From Maharashtra. Can't remember which district he's from, but he's
Okay.
from Maharashtra.
I was in JNU for some time for my PG. Yes, sir.
Wonderful campus, but it's
Yes, sir. Indeed.
become a little dead now due to the current dispensation.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. I think it is quite deliberate.
Of course. And Tushita director, Dr. Anuka Singh, she taught sociology there for many years at JNU. She's also glad that she got out when she did, because it's now,
Yes, sir.
Anyway, what else? Not much to say except read up in your spare time, read these things, read about Babasaheb, think more about karma rebirth, because he does give some good examples, and maybe we will look at them. Because in the context of our teacher right now, it's said that he's clinically dead, but he's still in meditation. So what's going on? They made even a video of him sitting in meditation, but he's dead. So how is he sitting in meditation? And the body not doing anything, not going into any kind of, rigidity, and not smelling, nothing. Why? So from a Mahayana, Vajrayana perspective, it's very simple. What is necessary for the brain function and the heart function has ceased functioning. That doesn't mean the most subtle level of consciousness has ceased functioning. And if a yogi is proficient, they can use the most subtle level of consciousness to meditate in. And because it's still functioning, then it has an effect on, on the whole body. So the body does not yet show any signs of decay. And in fact, they are not going to, the latest information is they're not going to cremate the body. It will not need to be cremated. They will embalm it. That is the advice from very high lamas. So interesting, no? There's obviously something that continues after the death of the clinical death of the ordinary body. what it is described differently in the different schools of philosophical thought, which are there in Buddhism, which again is a very, very healthy thing. There's not just one Buddhist dogma. It is like this. There are different schools of thought, which throughout history have debated with each other. But the highest school says, of course, things which are hard to understand, that the mind is, the subtle mind is the merely labeled, it is the merely imputed, subtle, most subtle level of consciousness, moments of consciousness, awareness, merely labeled. In other words, nothing graspable there, nothing graspable. You can say, okay, this is the mind. It's in a sense, it's not there, but it's there, and it has the ability to keep the seeds or whatever vibration of karma, because karma is something we carry from life to life, according to all the Buddhist texts. It's just we have to understand it, what it is, and that's not easy. Anyway, what I'm saying is there's room for a lot more discussion and debate and study. It would be wonderful if all of us could study what Vasubandhu has to say on karma, which is a lot. And then we could also study some of what the middle way Madhyamaka school says about mind. And then we could study Ambedkar. And if you could do that, then you're a very fortunate person. It means you have a lot of time. I don't have that time right now. But all of you young people can do some study. If you're not corporate slaves. Yeah, if you're a corporate slave, you have no hope yet. Well, you have hope because you have Buddha nature. Yeah. Okay, I think good for today. It's 9 o'clock almost. And I thank you all for your patience. And we can dedicate briefly that, people get more understanding of what Babasaheb means to people, because he's often dismissed as somebody who was collaborating with the British and so forth. But whatever he did, you see, he was doing for his people. It's very downtrodden, suffering people. So he can be easily misunderstood by upper caste people, or ideologues, whatever. So we should understand him and what he was trying to do. And we could generate a lot of aspiration to enter into discussion and dialogue with Dalit Buddhists. And there might be some mutual enrichment. And where they need instruction and teaching also and more input, we should, may we be able to give them. May authentic teachings always be there for people, whoever they are. And may the people have access to them. That's so important. And in terms of people who had a connection with Lama Zopa Rinpoche, then may we continue our connection with this most kind Guru, whom I knew for 44 years and who helped me tremendously from the very first time I met him way back in England. And so in that way, may we get an experience of the kindness of the bodhisattvas, the actual kindness of these compassionate beings who are living for to benefit others, not for themselves. And may this inspire us to become just like them. Also engage in the path which will lead to bodhisattvahood and also to Buddhahood. So may we engage in that. And so whatever we've done today, may it, this twofold dedication, may it help contribute to more understanding and appreciation of Babasaheb and his teachings, and more dialogue and engagement with the Dalit community of Buddhists, helping them in whatever way we can. And may it help us to create a cause for most kind Kyabje Lama Zopa Rinpoche to again manifest in this world to guide those with whom he has connection. Yeah. So there will be tomorrow, Saturday, on Sunday morning, 11:30, will be our next session. We'll see, not yet decided exactly what we'll do, but there will be something on Sunday morning, 11:30 to maybe 12:30 or something. Maybe not a very long session. So until then, thank you very much, and have a good evening, and get good rest. Yeah, thank you all very, very much. Thank you. Good night. Good night.